I have been a classification clerk at Veth Station for 31 years. I have processed intake forms for 11,422 individual passengers, not counting transit cargo declarations, not counting the short-stay manifests that come through on the freight lanes, not counting the quarterly crew transfer packets that I sign in batches of 800 at the end of each cycle. 11,422 individual sentient beings, each one assigned a threat index, a biological hazard rating, a biomorigin classification, and a civil standing marker before they set a single limb past the yellow arrival line on Concourse D. In 31 years, I had never left a field blank. The form for the human arrived on a teth cycle morning, mid-rotation, when the light panels in my processing bay had just cycled to their mid-shift amber, and the concourse below me was running at half capacity. It came through on the standard automated intake feed: passenger name, point of origin, vessel registry, transit purpose, length of stay. I opened it the way I open every form, which is to say without looking at it directly, the way you do not look directly at work that has become the rhythm of your own breathing. My second hand was already moving to populate the threat index field before my primary eyes had registered the line that read biome origin. I stopped. The biome origin line read, ARDENVAST, Class 17 Catastrophic Uncolonized DESIGNATED Terminal Indigenous Apex Fauna. I looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at the threat index field. Then I looked back at the biome origin line. In 31 years, the classification index had never returned a result of blank for any biological origin point I had ever entered. The index contained entries for every known inhabited and formerly inhabited world, every biome grade from Class 1 through Class 15, and a supplementary table for the 6 Class 16 designations that had been surveyed but not settled. I had used the supplementary table exactly twice. Class 17 did not appear in the supplementary table. I typed the designation again, carefully, one character at a time. ARDENVAST, Class 17. The index processed for 0.3 standard seconds longer than usual. It returned the same result. The threat index field sat empty, white, waiting. Below me, through the processing bay's observation window, the passenger in question was standing at the yellow arrival line on Concourse D. She was small, a fact that had registered on my secondary eyes when the arrival visual feed populated the form, but which had not seemed relevant until now. Small and still. The humans I had processed before her, 4 of them over 31 years, all from lower grade worlds, Class 12 and under, had moved through Concourse D the way most passengers move through Concourse D, which is to say with purpose and mild impatience, the small friction of beings who want to get where they are going. This one was not moving. She was standing at the yellow line with a transit bag over one shoulder, and she was looking up at the processing bay windows with the expression of a person who has been waiting for a long time and has made peace with the wait. I submitted a flag to my supervisor's queue, priority, routine. I returned to the other 17 forms in my current batch. My supervisor, senior classifier Doran Vethanath, was not a slow reader. She came to my station in 4 minutes, which by the standards of the classification authority's internal response protocols was reasonably prompt, although she arrived with the particular quality of presence that told me she had already decided the flag was an error. She looked at the form. She looked at the biome origin line. She looked at the empty threat index field. Clerical input, she said. I entered it twice, I said, character by character. She typed it herself, her second hand moving with the efficiency of a woman who had been doing this for 42 years and had never once been wrong about a clerical input error. The index processed. The field stayed empty. Doran Vethanath said nothing for a moment. Then she said, the index has a gap. Yes, I said. This is a cataloging deficiency in the index, not a threat classification. I understand the distinction, I said. I flagged it because a blank field in the threat index column triggers a hold under Protocol 7, and I cannot complete the intake without a populated field. Then populate it manually. Extrapolate from the Class 15 and Class 16 supplementary entries. Use your judgment. My judgment, I said, and I said it carefully, is that I am not qualified to assign a threat index to a species from a Class 17 biome origin, because no such index exists, and I do not have the training to construct one. I can hold the passenger at the yellow line until the index is updated, or I can refer upward to a classification authority senior officer with the jurisdiction to issue a provisional clearance, or I can. Hold her at the line, Doran said. I'll send a query to the Galactic Biome Registry. We'll have a response in 2 to 4 cycles. She has a transit connection in 7 hours, I said. Doran Vethanath looked at me. She looked at the form. She looked out the processing bay window at the small human standing at the yellow line below us. Hold her at the line, she said again and left. I opened the communication channel to the yellow line and informed the passenger. Her name was listed on the manifest as Tara Vess, which I had already confirmed matched her vessel's passenger registry, that her intake processing had encountered a routine index verification delay, and that she was asked to remain at the arrival line until the matter was resolved. I told her it would be 2 to 4 standard cycles. She said, "All right." That was all she said. She sat down on the floor at the yellow line, cross-legged, and put her transit bag in her lap. A Thalvan family of 9, arriving behind her on the same vessel, filed around her on both sides, and she watched them pass with mild interest, the way you watch something that is happening in the world but does not concern you. She did not appear distressed. She did not appear impatient. She did not, as far as I could determine from the visual feed, and the 12-point behavioral analysis panel my station ran automatically on all held passengers, appear to be anything at all except comfortable. The behavioral analysis panel had a field for threat posture assessment. The field read, "Insufficient data." I had never seen that field read anything other than a numbered score. I went back to my other forms. The query to the Galactic Biome Registry came back in 6 hours, not 2 to 4 cycles, because the Galactic Biome Registry did not have a Class 17 entry either. What they sent back was a routing note that read, "Please submit formal classification request with supporting survey data to the Tertiary Species Board. Estimated PROCSSING time, 14 to 18 standard MONTHS." I read that response twice. Then I looked at the clock. The passenger's transit connection departed in 58 minutes. Doran Vethanath, when I reached her, told me to release the passenger under provisional clearance, mark the threat index field with a placeholder code, and submit a deficiency report to the Index Maintenance Bureau. She said this quickly, with the quality of someone who has made a decision and does not want to spend time examining it. I said, "Which placeholder code?" There was a pause. "Use your judgment," she said, and ended the channel. I sat at my station for 90 seconds. Then I called station security. I want to be precise about what I said. I did not say the passenger was dangerous. I did not say the passenger had done anything wrong. I said that a passenger on hold at Concourse D, yellow line, was awaiting a threat index classification that the index could not produce, and that in accordance with Protocol 7, I was requesting a security presence at the arrival zone as a procedural matter while I worked to obtain a provisional classification. I said I anticipated the matter would be resolved within the hour. The security officer I spoke with, Sub-Officer Perrin Hale Var, confirmed the request and told me a 2-person courtesy team would be present in 10 minutes. What arrived in 10 minutes was Perrin Hale Var himself, 2 senior constables, and a junior officer who was carrying a restraint kit, and appeared to be trying not to appear as though he was carrying a restraint kit. They came through the Concourse D security passage at the gate end, 4 of them, in the authorities' gray and gold, and they walked toward the yellow arrival line with the measured pace of officers who have dealt with difficult passengers before and know how to project institutional weight. From my processing bay window, I watched Tyra Vess watch them come. She did not stand up. She was still sitting on the floor, cross-legged, her transit bag in her lap. She had not moved in 6 hours except once, when she had opened the bag and taken out a flat canteen and drunk from it, and then put it back. She watched the 4 security officers approach her with the same mild interest she had watched the Thalvin family file past her, which is to say with no particular affect, the way you watch something that is happening. Perrin Hailvar stopped 2 meters from her. He was a large man, most of the security staff at Veth Station selected for size. It was an informal preference in the hearing culture, and he had the practiced stance of someone who is accustomed to his own physical presence communicating a message before he says anything. He said something to her. I was not on the audio channel for Concourse D at that moment, and I did not have the lip translation enabled, so I do not know his exact words. Whatever he said, she looked up at him from the floor without standing, and she said something back. I switched on the audio channel. "Don't need you to stand," Perrin was saying. His voice had the slightly elevated register of a man recalibrating in real time. "I need you to come with me to the secondary processing room for a brief compliance interview. It's standard procedure for a delayed intake classification." "Is it?" she said. "Yes. I've been sitting here for 6 hours," she said. "I've missed my connection." "We're aware of that. The authority will arrange alternative routing at no additional cost." She looked at him. Not up exactly, the angle was wrong for that, given she was on the floor and he was standing, but she looked at him in a way that suggested the vertical differential was not something she was finding particularly meaningful. "All right," she said. She stood in one motion, picking up the transit bag. She was very small. The crown of her head reached approximately Perrin Hailvar's shoulder. He was a large man. She was small, and she stood up from the floor the way you stand up from a chair, without using her hands, without any visible effort, and then she looked at him and waited. Perrin Hailvar said something I did not catch clearly on the audio. I heard the word escort and I heard the word standard. The junior officer behind him took a small half-step to the side, not backward, to the side, the kind of repositioning that is not a retreat. She went with them. The secondary processing room at Veth Station is a clean, rectangular chamber on the lower concourse, 6 meters by 4, with a table and 2 chairs, and a communications terminal and a wall panel that shows the authority seal. It is used for compliance interviews, for identity verification disputes, for the occasional commercial cargo misclassification. I have been inside it perhaps twice in 31 years. It is a room designed to communicate that a procedure is underway, that the procedure is orderly, and that the authority is in control of the procedure. I watched the secondary processing room feed from my station. Perrin Hailvar sat across the table from her. The 2 senior constables stood at the wall behind him. The junior officer had, I noticed, left the restraint kit outside the room. She sat with the transit bag on the table in front of her, her hands resting on it, and she answered Perrin's questions in a way that I would describe, if I were filing a behavioral annotation, as cooperative and brief. Yes, she was traveling alone. Yes, she had come from Ardenvast. Yes, she understood there was an index deficiency regarding her world of origin. No, she was not carrying prohibited substances. No, she was not traveling on behalf of a commercial or governmental entity. She was, she said, in transit to the Harath system for reasons she described as personal. "Personal?" Perrin said. "Yes," she said. "Can you be more specific?" "I'm visiting someone," she said. Perrin made a note. "What is your occupation?" "I work in groundwater reclamation," she said. Perrin wrote that down. He looked at it. I could not see his expression clearly on the feed, but I saw him stop writing and look at what he had written, and I believe he was experiencing the same indexing problem I had experienced when I first opened her intake form, which is the problem of looking at a thing and not being able to find the drawer that should contain it. Groundwater reclamation. On a Class 17 world, reclaiming water from a biome that, by the survey data I had since found in the registry's archival footnotes, the survey that had produced the Class 17 designation and the notation DESIGNATED terminal, indigenous apex fauna, had been described in the surveyor's report as hostile to any form of organized biological activity at a fundamental atmospheric, geological, and ecological level. The survey team had landed on Ardenvast for 11 hours. 3 of them had not returned to the ship. The remaining 2 had submitted their report and recommended that no further surveys be conducted. That had been 87 years ago. Humans had settled there 40 years later. I was still doing the arithmetic on that when Perrin Hale-Var moved to the question of transit duration. "How long have you been traveling?" he asked. "From Ardenvast, about 3 weeks. "And before that, your last departure from Ardenvast?" She thought about it, not the way someone thinks when they are trying to remember, but the way someone thinks when they are doing a conversion, when the number they have in their head is in one unit and the question is in another. "About 4 years, she said. "You have been off-world for 4 years?" "Yes." "And before that, you lived on Ardenvast?" "Yes." "For how long?" "My whole life," she said. There was a pause on the audio. One of the senior constables behind Perrin shifted weight. It was a small movement, the kind of movement a person makes when their feet have started receiving information from somewhere lower in the nervous system than the reasoning brain, the part that has been doing its own quiet arithmetic. Perrin said, "Are there others? Others from Ardenvast on Veth Station or in transit through the system?" "Not that I know of," she said. "You traveled alone?" "Yes." He looked at his notes. He looked at her. He said, "I'd like to arrange a full biometric survey. It's standard procedure for." "Is it?" she said again. The pause was shorter this time. "For passengers whose world of origin is not currently indexed," he said. She considered this. "How long does a biometric survey take?" "Approximately 4 hours." "And my connection?" "We'll arrange alternative routing," he said, and his voice had settled into a register that I recognized, the register of an experienced officer who has decided the best outcome of this conversation is the one where it ends without anything having happened. "All right," she said. She unzipped the transit bag and began taking items out of it, setting them on the table with the systematic patience of someone who has been searched before and has no objection to the procedure. Perrin watched her do this. The 2 senior constables watched her do this. She set out the canteen, a change of clothes, a small toolkit that she opened flat on the table so its contents were visible, a packet of what appeared to be preserved rations, and a folded document that she placed to one side. She looked at the empty bag. She looked at Perrin. "I'll need the bag back," she said. "Of course," he said. She sat back and waited. The biometric survey took 6 hours, not 4. This was not because anything anomalous was found. The biometric unit completed its standard pass without flagging any prohibited biological material, but because the survey technician called in a supervisor halfway through, and the supervisor called in a second supervisor, and the second supervisor spent 40 minutes reviewing the output data before concluding that the unit was functioning correctly. The output data for biometric density, bone composition, muscle fiber ratio, connective tissue index, pulmonary capacity, cardiac output at resting state, was not in any range the unit had been designed to flag. It simply produced numbers that the supervisors looking at them could not reconcile with the subject sitting in front of them. I know this because the second supervisor filed a note in the system, which I accessed because my station monitors any annotation to an open intake form, and hers was still open. The note read, "Biometric values within human species, normal range per available reference data." Note: available reference data limited to 4 prior subjects, all from Class 8 to Class 12 origin WRLDS. No comparison data available for Class 17 biome origin. Recommend index update. While the biometric survey was running, I did what I do when a form does not cooperate. I went looking for the underlying data. This is not an unusual practice for a classification clerk. When the index returns a result that surprises me, I go to the source documents that the index is built from, and I find the survey records, and I read them, and usually the index makes more sense afterward. I went looking for the Ardenvast survey records. The Galactic Biome Registries Archive is organized by designation tier. Class 1 through Class 12 surveys fill the first 14 volumes of the standard archive. Class 13 through Class 15 occupy 3 more. The Class 16 records, all 6 of them, live in a supplementary folder that I had accessed twice in 31 years. The Class 17 folder did not appear in the standard archive navigation. I searched for it by designation number. I found one entry, flagged with a restricted access marker, that required a senior classification authorization I did not have. I put in a request to Doran Vethanath for the authorization. She denied it in 40 seconds, which was the fastest I had ever received a response from her on anything. I went to the registry's public access portal instead, which does not have the same survey data but has the summary classifications, the designation sheets that describe the scoring criteria used to arrive at a classification tier. I pulled up the Class 15 sheet, the Class 16 sheet, and the Class 17 sheet. The Class 17 sheet was 2 sentences long. The first sentence read, "Class 17 catastrophic designation is ASSIGNED to biome ENVRONMNTS assessed to pose a statistically absolute threat to UNAUGMNTED sentient life across all known biological tolerance PARAMETRS." The second sentence read, "As of this registry update, no Class 17 world currently SUPPORTS-AN established sentient colony." I looked at that second sentence for a while. Then I found the registry update timestamp. Then I looked at the human settlement data for Ardenvast, which was in a different branch of the registry entirely, filed under Exceptional CIRCUMSTANCES, Unsanctioned Colonial Activity, and which had been last updated 16 years ago with a note that read, "Colony self-sustaining, no intervention REQUESTED, file status inactive." The registry had never updated the Class 17 summary sheet to reflect the fact that there was, in point of fact, an established sentient colony on a Class 17 world. The two databases did not talk to each other. The gap in the threat index was not the only gap. The whole administrative structure of the galaxy's biological classification system had, at some point, simply declined to integrate the existence of Ardenvast's human population into its own records, not out of malice, but out of the ordinary institutional entropy that produces, over decades, the quiet accumulation of things that are true but have not been filed correctly. I added this to my incident notes. The biometric survey completed while I was writing. The second supervisor's note appeared in the system. I read the cardiac output index that she had documented and sat with it for a moment, and then I did a calculation that I want to record here because it seems to me to be important. A Class 15 world, the highest grade world with a populated index entry, produces, in its native fauna and the sentient species that have evolved alongside that fauna, a particular baseline physiology. The index entry for Class 15 origin species includes a threat modifier of 4.7, applied to the standard sentient species baseline score. That modifier accounts for the additional bone density, musculature, cardiovascular capacity, and pain tolerance that a Class 15 biome environment selects for over generations of evolutionary pressure. A Class 15 sentient being is, by the authority's own index, significantly more physically capable than most species in the registration database. The biometric values for Tara Vess, compared against the Class 15 reference range, were measurably higher across 7 of the 12 index parameters. She was from a Class 17 world. I did not have a threat modifier for a Class 17 biome environment, because no such modifier existed in the index. I tried to extrapolate one, using the scaling ratio between the Class 14, Class 15, and Class 16 data points, extending the curve by 2 additional tiers. The number I arrived at was not a number I felt comfortable putting in the incident notes. I closed that portion of the calculation and moved on. It was while I was looking at the cardiac output index again, checking my reading of it, making sure I had not made an error of decimal placement, that my station received a formal communication from the Classification Authority Senior Command. The communication was addressed to Station Security Command, copied to my station as the filing clerk of record for the open intake case. It was a restricted movement upgrade. It notified station security that the passenger in question had been elevated from compliance hold to provisional containment protocol, and that a full isolation order was to be issued until the intake classification could be completed. The communication noted that provisional containment protocol required a minimum 8 officer response team. I read the communication twice. Then I opened my communication channel to Perrin Halevar. He answered. I heard something in the background of his audio, a particular kind of organized motion, the sound of a corridor being prepared rather than occupied. I see the communication, he said before I could speak. Are you assembling the team? I asked. I'm putting it together, he said. His voice had the quality it had in the compliance interview audio, calibrated, measured, choosing words with care. Perrin, I said. Seville. She is currently in the survey room, alone. She has been in there for approximately 3 hours. She ate something. She is waiting. I'm aware, he said. Has she done anything to indicate? No, he said. Nothing. She asked the survey technician if she could have some water, and the technician brought her water, and she said thank you, and the technician left, and she sat down and waited. I thought about that. Where is the survey technician now? I asked. A pause. She went home, Perrin said. Early, said she had a headache. I looked at my incident notes. I looked at the Classification Authority's communication. I looked at the door feed for the survey room, where the visual showed Tara Vess sitting at the bench with her transit bag in her lap, her hands resting flat on it, her eyes on the middle distance. How many of your officers have been inside the room with her today? I asked. Counting the compliance interview and the biometric survey team, Perrin said, 14. How many of those 14 are currently at their posts? The pause this time was the longest one yet. 7, he said. I did not say anything. The other 7 are, he started. 3 are technically on shift, but I've had 2 go home with complaints I can't formally classify. 2 are doing inventory. 2 are on an extended meal break that I am choosing not to scrutinize. They're not sick, I said. No, he said, they're not. They just don't want to go back in. Seville, he said. None of them have said that. None of them have said anything that I can put in a report. They have all been professional. They have all done exactly what was asked of them. And they are all, for reasons they have not articulated to me and I have not pressed them on, finding things to do that do not involve going back into the secondary processing block. I considered this, and you, I said. I'm putting together an 8-officer team, he said. From your current available personnel. A pause. I'm working on it. I looked at the door feed. She had picked up the canteen and was drinking from it. She capped it, set it on the bench beside her, and picked up the folded document from the transit bag, the one she had placed to one side during the compliance interview, and she unfolded it and read it. It appeared to be a personal letter, handwritten. She read it slowly, The way you read something you have read before, not for the information but for the particular quality of a written voice you want to hear again. Then she refolded it, put it back in the bag, and sat with her hands on the bag again. "Perrin," I said, "I am going to put in a counter-communication to the Classification Authority Senior Command. I am going to note that the Provisional Containment Protocol was issued on the basis of an incomplete threat assessment, specifically the absence of any populated threat index field, and that an escalated response in the absence of any observed threatening behavior or Protocol 7 trigger event constitutes an authority overreach. I am going to note that the passenger has been in voluntary compliance for approximately 9 hours, has cooperated with all requested procedures, has generated no security incidents, and that the appropriate resolution is the provisional clearance I was already authorized to issue." There was a long silence. "Can you do that?" Perrin asked. His voice had shifted. There was something in it that I would describe, in a behavioral annotation, as careful relief. The relief of a man who has been waiting for someone else to say the thing he cannot say from where he is standing. "I have been a classification clerk at Veth Station for 31 years, I said. "I have filed 417 formal procedural objections to classification authority escalation orders, and I have been overruled on 9 of them. I can do it." "Do it," he said. I filed the counter-communication. The Classification Authority Senior Command reviewed it in 20 minutes, which was, I thought, probably a record. They sent back a response that described my counter-communication as noted, and that the Provisional Containment Protocol was being suspended pending review, and that I was authorized to issue the provisional clearance at my discretion. It was worded in the language of the authority granting me something. I had observed, over 31 years, that when the authority used the language of granting you something you had always had the authority to do, it meant the authority had looked at the situation and decided it would prefer not to own what happened next. I logged out of my terminal and went downstairs. The second supervisor had underlined, "Recommend index update" twice. I had a standard phrase I used in my own reports when an index gap appeared. The phrase was, "This represents a cataloging deficiency," and I had used it 3 times in 31 years for minor regional taxonomic disputes, and once for a transit document format change that had not been reflected in the intake system. I typed it now into my open incident log for this intake case, and then I stopped typing and sat for a moment in my amber-lit processing bay, looking at the phrase, and I thought about what it actually meant when the thing that was not in the index was a living person who had grown up on a world that survey teams did not come back from, who had been sitting on the floor of Concourse D for 6 hours without apparent distress, and who had answered every question in compliance interview with the tone of someone who had already considered the question and found it manageable. I did not finish the sentence. I closed the log entry. I opened the communications channel to Perrin Halevar's station and asked for an update. He answered immediately. "Survey complete," he said. "No prohibited materials, no biosecurity flags. She's clean on everything the unit checks." "And the biometric data?" A pause. "Within range," he said. "Within what range?" Another pause. "Within available reference range," he said. "Perrin," I said. "Several." "What does her resting cardiac output index at?" He told me the number. I sat with the number for a moment. The number was not alarming in the way that a number outside a safety threshold is alarming. It was alarming in a different way, in the way that a load-bearing wall is alarming when you realize that the wall is there because without it the structure does not stand, and you have been leaning on it for 6 hours, and you did not know until now what the wall was for. A resting cardiac output in that range, in a human standard body frame, indexed against the metabolic rate the biometric survey had also recorded, meant that she was at rest, sitting in a chair, answering questions, running at a level of baseline physiological readiness that most of the security staff at Veth Station would reach only in the middle of an active physical situation they were trained to handle. It was not abnormal for her. It was, I was now understanding, normal. It was what living on Ardenvast for your entire life produced as a baseline. She was not at rest the way most people are at rest. She was at rest the way a weapon is at rest, which is to say contained, not inactive. "Are you still with her?" I asked. "Yes," Perrin said. "She's in the survey room, waiting." "How long has she been waiting?" "Since the survey ended, about 40 minutes. "How is she?" There was a pause longer than the others. "She's fine," he said. "She ate something, she's just sitting." "Has she asked about her connection?" "Once," he said. "An hour ago. I told her we were still processing and she said all right." I looked at the clock. She had been at Veth Station for 14 hours. She had been at the yellow arrival line for 6. She had been in the secondary processing room for 8. And for 40 minutes of that she had been in the survey room alone after a 6-hour biometric examination. She had not complained. She had not demanded contact with a legal representative. She had not raised her voice, which I would have been able to confirm from the audio logs even if Perrin had not been telling me she was fine. She had eaten something, which meant she had decided she might as well, and she was sitting. The thing about sitting, about being willing to sit quietly for a long time, in a room you did not choose and cannot leave, while a bureaucratic process runs its course around you, is that most beings experience it as a form of pressure. The waiting is the pressure. The not knowing is the pressure. The understanding that somewhere people who have authority over your situation are making decisions about you based on information you cannot access. That is a particular species of pressure, and it tends to produce responses. Restlessness, requests for updates, anxiety behavior, the body's chemistry making arguments that the reasoning mind cannot quite suppress. She was not producing any of that. I had processed 11,422 beings through Veth Station. I had seen beings in compliance holds for much shorter periods than 14 hours. I knew what waiting looked like when it was costing something. I knew what waiting looked like when it was not. I told Perrin I would be down in 20 minutes. I had not left my processing bay for anything other than end-of-rotation administrative meetings in 11 years. The clerks at the adjacent stations glanced at me as I put on my identification badge and logged out of my terminal, and I could tell from the glances that this was unusual enough to register. I took the internal lift to the lower concourse and walked through the security passage to the secondary processing block. The survey room was at the end of the block. Through the observation window in the door, I could see her sitting at the survey bench, her transit bag repacked and closed in her lap, eating something from a small foil container. She was eating with the methodical focus of someone fueling up, not savoring, the way people eat when eating is a functional matter, and the food is adequate and nothing more is required of the experience. Perrin Halevar was standing in the corridor outside. He saw me and did not look surprised, which surprised me. "The form is still open," I said. "I know," he said. "I need to close it." "I know that too," he said. I looked through the observation window. She had finished eating and was folding the foil container flat, pressing out the air with the heel of her hand, and tucking it into a pocket of her transit bag with the automatic economy of someone who lives in environments where you do not leave things lying around. "Has she given you anything I can use for the threat index field?" I asked. "She answered everything I asked," Perrin said. "I know, I watched the interview. I mean, has she given you anything I can put in the field?" He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "Then the field stays blank." "Yes," he said. I looked at him. He was a large man, Perrin Halevar, 22 years in station security. He had handled everything from commercial freight disputes to the Andravath transit riot 4 years ago, in which 3 security officers had been seriously injured and he had not. He was the kind of officer who produced in other officers a feeling of safety that was partly his size and partly his record, and partly the quality of steadiness that some people carry with them as a structural feature of their personality. He was standing in the corridor outside the survey room at a distance of about 6 meters from the closed door, and I noticed, looking at him, that he had not moved closer to the door since I had arrived. That he was, in fact, positioned in the corridor in the way that someone positions themselves when they want to be near a thing they are responsible for without being adjacent to it. I said, Perrin. He said, Seville. I said, what happened in the compliance interview? He looked at the observation window. She answered the questions, he said. She cooperated fully. Nothing happened. Something happened, I said. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the observation window, the human was sitting with her hands folded on her transit bag. She was not looking at the observation window. She was looking at a point on the middle distance, the way people look when they are waiting and have been waiting long enough that the act of waiting has become its own kind of occupation. When I asked her how long she'd lived on Ardenvast, Perrin said, she said her whole life. I asked how old she was. She said 26. I waited. 26 years on a Class 17 world, he said. And then I asked her, I don't know why I asked this. It wasn't on the standard form. I asked her what the most dangerous thing on Ardenvast was. What did she say? He looked at the observation window. She thought about it, he said, for a while, and then she said the wet season. I looked at the observation window. Not the fauna, he said. Not the geological events, not the atmospheric conditions, not any specific organism. The wet season. I asked her why, and she said that during the wet season the primary predators moved to higher ground, which pushed the secondary predators into the mid-elevation zones, which pushed the mid-elevation fauna down into the settlements. She said the settlements had reinforced walls, and the walls held most of the time, but that during a bad wet season you could lose 3 or 4 people before the season broke. She said it like she was describing a tax assessment, like it was an administrative burden, like losing 3 or 4 people in a season was the kind of thing you accounted for and planned around and did not, particularly, dwell on. He stopped. Then he said, and then she picked up her canteen and drank from it and set it back down and looked at me and waited for the next question. I looked through the observation window at the small human sitting in the survey room with her transit bag in her lap. How are your constables? I asked. Perrin said, Reva asked for reassignment to the cargo inspection unit this morning. I nodded. We stood in the corridor for a moment. The ambient sound of the lower concourse, foot traffic, the distant hum of the freight lift systems, the routine announcement cycle running through the station's PA, moved around us in the way that ordinary noise moves around ordinary space, and none of it seemed particularly relevant to the corridor we were standing in or the room at the end of it. I had a thought that I want to record here, because I have not recorded it elsewhere, and I think it belongs in the official history of this incident, even if it does not fit any formal category the incident report provides. The thought was this. The classification authority had assembled, in response to one small human sitting in a survey room eating her rations and reading a letter, the full machinery of provisional containment protocol. They had moved from routine compliance hold to formal isolation order in approximately 3 hours, on the basis of no observed threatening behavior, no Protocol 7 trigger event, and no evidence of any kind except a blank field in a database that had never been updated to reflect what she was. The index had failed. The behavioral analysis panel had returned insufficient data. The biometric survey had documented values the supervisors could not reconcile with their reference tables, and the authorities' response to all of that, to the irreducible fact that their system simply could not produce a number for her, had been to escalate, to add officers, to issue a formal order, as if the problem with the blank field was one that needed more institutional weight pressing on it. 14 officers had gone into the secondary processing block over the course of the day. 7 of them had found reasons not to come back. Not because anything had happened, because of the quality of nothing happening that she produced, because sitting with her, asking her questions, watching her answer them with the careful economy of someone who understood exactly what the questions were about and found them manageable. That was the thing that had sent 7 trained security officers to inventory duty and extended meal breaks and early departures for headaches that were not headaches, not threat, presence. The simple, unaugmented, undisguised presence of a person from a Class 17 world, doing nothing at all except being what 26 years of Ardenvast had made her. I thought about the 8-officer team Perrin had been trying to assemble. I thought about the survey technician who had gone home early. I thought about the provisional containment protocol, with its minimum response requirement and its formal isolation, order language, and its weight of institutional authority, sitting in the classification authority's communication, as though authority was the variable that needed to be increased. The blank field was not the problem. The blank field was the record. The blank field was the system telling the truth about itself. For once, instead of generating a number that fit the available categories and satisfied the form, and allowed everyone to sign off and move on. "I have to close the form," I said. "I know," Perrin said. I straightened my identification badge and walked to the door. I want to describe accurately what it was like to open that door. I have tried to describe it in the incident report, which sits in the classification authority's open files to this day, and I have not been satisfied with any version of the description I have produced. The difficulty is that nothing happened when I opened the door. Nothing happened when I entered the room. She looked up at me. She had heard the door, and she looked at me the way she had looked at the security team coming toward her on Concourse D, the way she had looked at Perrin Halevar's questions, the way she had apparently looked at the wet season on Ardenvast. With attention, with mild interest, with the quality of someone who is receiving information about their environment and processing it and finding it manageable. She said, "Are you the one who flagged my form?" "Yes," I said. "I'm Seville Orath Khan. I'm the intake classification clerk who processed your arrival." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you for flagging it properly." I had not expected that. "I'm sorry you've been waiting," I said. "It's all right," she said. "I understand there's a gap in the index." "Yes." "Has it been resolved?" "No," I said. "The index update will take 14 to 18 standard months through the Tertiary Species Board. I can issue you a provisional clearance under the Classification Authority's discretionary protocols, which will allow you to complete your transit. The threat index field on your intake form will be marked with a provisional placeholder." She nodded. "What's the placeholder?" "Pending review," I said. She looked at me. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "That's what you have for me, pending review." "It is the accurate reflection of the current state of the index," I said. She was quiet. I want to record, because I think it is the most important thing I observed during the entire 14 hours of this incident, what she was not doing during that silence. She was not offended. She was not amused in the way that something faintly absurd can produce a kind of humor. She was not frustrated in the way that beings waiting in bureaucratic processes are frustrated. She was thinking. She was sitting with the provisional placeholder designation the way she had sat with the compliance interview questions, and the biometric survey, and the 6 hours on the floor at the yellow arrival line. Which is to say, she was sitting with it as a fact about the world, a fact among other facts, a thing that was true, and that she was now incorporating into her understanding of where she was and what the situation was. "All right," she said. "I'll also arrange alternative routing to the Hareth system," I said, "at no additional cost. The next available connection departs in approximately 4 hours. I appreciate that, she said. I processed the provisional clearance at the terminal in the survey room. It took 11 minutes. When it was done, I printed the clearance document and slid it across the bench to her. She picked it up and folded it and put it in the outer pocket of her transit bag, next to the folded foil container from her meal. I stood up to leave. She said, "Can I ask you something?" I said yes. "The index," she said. "The gap, how long has it been there?" I thought about the answer. "Since humans settled on Ardenvast," I said. "The world was surveyed and designated before settlement. The designation is in the index. The species that settled there afterward, the designation of origin for those species, that was never incorporated. So there have been people from Ardenvast passing through systems like this one for decades," she said, "and none of the indexes have them." It appears so. She thought about this. Then she said, "How many Ardenvast origin passengers have come through Veth Station before me?" I had already looked this up. "None," I said. She nodded slowly. I want to say here that I understand what that means. It means that she was the first Ardenvast-born human to pass through this station in 31 years, possibly in the station's history. And the reason there had been no others before her was not, I thought, because no others had tried. It was because the transit routes that passed through Veth Station were not the routes that Ardenvast origin humans typically used. They used other routes. The routes that had other stations and other classification systems, and other clerks who had presumably also encountered blank threat index fields, and also typed class 17 ARDENVASD character by character into an index that had no answer, and also issued provisional clearances and filed deficiency reports that went into open file status and were not followed up. The index gap was not new. It had just never been my problem before. "I hope your visit to the Hareth system goes well," I said. "Thank you," she said. She picked up the transit bag and stood. I held the door for her. She walked out into the corridor. Perrin Hailvar was still there. She looked at him the way she had looked at him on Concourse D, without particular affect, and she said, "Thank you for your time," and he said, "Safe travels," and she walked down the corridor toward the lift to the upper concourse. We watched her go. She walked the way she had done everything else, without hurry, without hesitation, with the contained efficiency of a person whose body has an opinion about its surroundings and has decided the surroundings are not a problem. The corridor was not a challenge. The lift would not be a challenge. Concourse D, the connection gate, the 3-week transit to Hareth, none of it would be a challenge. Not because nothing would happen. Because she had a certain relationship with things happening. A relationship built over 26 years on a world that survey teams did not come back from. And the relationship was, things happen, you account for them, you do not particularly dwell. When she turned the corner at the end of the corridor and was no longer visible, Perrin Hailvar exhaled. It was a quiet sound. He did not appear to be aware he had made it. I returned to my processing bay. I logged back into my terminal. I opened the incident report for intake case VETH 3301 provisional, and I looked at the open threat index field for the last time. I could put pending review there. I could put the provisional placeholder code that my supervisor had authorized. I could put the class 16 supplementary index entry that Doran Vethanath had suggested I extrapolate from, which would give the form a number and close the incident and file the deficiency report, and send the matter to the Tertiary Species Board for its 14 to 18-month review. I sat with my stylus over the field for a while. The thing that I kept coming back to, the thing that I have come back to in the years since, the thing that I find I cannot adequately place in the authorities' preferred categories of threat assessment, even now, was not the biometric data, and not the cardiac output index, and not the compliance interview, and not even the wet season and the 3 or 4 people who were lost in a bad one. The thing I kept coming back to was that she had thanked me for flagging her form properly. Not sarcastically, not with the compressed anger of someone who has spent 14 hours in a holding process and has found a way to make gratitude function as an indictment. She had said it the way you say something you mean, directly, because the directness was more efficient than any other mode of delivery. She had been flagged, held, interviewed, surveyed, and made to wait through 3 missed connections, and her considered assessment of the situation was that the clerk who had initiated the process had done so correctly, and she found it appropriate to say so. That was the thing, not the strength, not the readiness, not the baseline that the biometric unit had documented and the 2 supervisors had spent 40 minutes trying to reconcile with the standard reference tables. The thing was that she had understood from the beginning that the index did not have her. She had known, sitting down on the floor at the yellow arrival line, that the wait was going to be long. She had not been surprised by any of it, not the compliance interview, not the biometric survey, not the provisional clearance and the placeholder code. She had been through other stations, other indexes that came back blank. She knew the shape of this particular absence in the galaxy's record-keeping, because she had been encountering it for 4 years of travel, and she had learned to sit down and wait and eat something when she had the chance, and thank people who did their jobs correctly. That was the thing that I could not put in the field. I typed pending review and closed the form. The deficiency report went to the Index Maintenance Bureau. The incident file went into open status. It has been open for 9 years. I check it occasionally, less for any expectation that it will close than out of a habit that I cannot account for. The Tertiary Species Board has not yet completed its review of the Class 17 Ardenvast classification request. The threat index field, in the working copy of the form that lives in the incident file, still reads pending review. I have not had another Ardenvast origin passenger in 9 years. I do not know if that is because there are not many of them traveling, or because they use other routes, or because after 9 years the word has gotten around. If that is a thing that travels in whatever informal channels people from Class 17 worlds used to communicate about transit systems, that Veth station will put you in a room for 14 hours and come out the other end with pending review in the threat index field, which is not exactly a hospitality recommendation. If Tara Vess is reading this, which she is not, because this is an Internal Classification Authority incident report, and Internal Classification Authority incident reports do not circulate to the subjects they document, I would say, for the record, I still do not know what number to put in that field. I have thought about it for 9 years. I have read everything the Galactic Biome Registry has ever published about Class 17 designations. I have read the original Ardenvast survey report, all 12 pages of it, including the appendix that the 2 surviving surveyors submitted separately from the main report, which the registry had filed under supplementary observational data, and which had apparently not been read by anyone in 87 years. I have read the registry's own internal notation on the survey, which reads, "Recommend reclassification of ARDNVASD to Class 18 designation pending development of adequate classification criteria for Worlds AT this threat tier." I have noted that the registry has not yet developed adequate classification criteria for worlds at this threat tier. I have noted that humans settled on Ardenvast 40 years after the survey, and that there are now approximately 40,000 of them there, and that they have reinforced walls, and that they lose 3 or 4 people in a bad wet season, and that they appear, from what limited data exists, to regard this as an administrative burden rather than a crisis. I have noted that in the 9 years since Tara Vess passed through Veth Station, the Tertiary Species Board has issued 3 interim updates on the Ardenvast classification request, each of which noted the complexity of the assessment and the need for further data, and none of which has produced a completed index entry. The board's most recent interim update, issued 14 months ago, contained a single paragraph that I found myself reading several times. The paragraph noted that the board had, in the course of its review, identified 17 other inhabited worlds currently designated Class 13 or higher, on which human colonies had been established over the past century, and that none of these settlements had an index entry in the threat classification database. The paragraph recommended a comprehensive audit of human origin settlement data across all Class 13 and above designations, with a projected timeline of 2 to 3 standard years. 2 to 3 standard years for the audit alone. I thought about that. 17 worlds, not counting Ardenvast. 17 Class 13 or above biomes that had been producing human beings for generations, in some cases for a century, and none of them in the index. All of those people traveling through systems like this one, through stations with clerks like me, with security teams like Parents, with behavioral analysis panels and biometric survey units and threat index fields that sat empty and returned insufficient data when the system tried to assess them. All of them sitting on floors at yellow arrival lines, waiting. All of them saying, "All right." I have noted that I do not know how many of those 17 worlds have a wet season. I have noted that I do not know how many of them have something worse. I have noted, and this is the last thing I will note, that the Classification Authority has not updated the Threat Index database in the 2 years since the board's interim report, and that the field for Ardenvast origin passengers remains blank in my station's intake system, and that if another Ardenvast-born human walked through Concourse D tomorrow and stood at the yellow arrival line, I would open the intake form, move my second hand toward the Threat Index field, and stop. I would still not have a number. But I think, and this is not a formal finding, this is a clerk's note at the end of a 9-year-old incident report that nobody reads, I think I would know now what the blank field means. Not a gap, not a deficiency, not a cataloging error that needs to be corrected by a 14-month review and a 2 to 3 year audit. A boundary, the edge of what the system was built to measure, the place where the categories end, and the thing that the categories were built to contain looks back at you from the other side, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a transit bag in its lap, waiting with the particular patience of something that has been here the whole time and is not in any particular hurry. I have noted that I do not know what to put in the field. I have noted that I do not know what Tara Vest does in the Harath system, and whether she is still there, and whether she has been through other stations with other blank fields and other clerks who issued provisional clearances and filed deficiency reports and never countersigned the findings. I have noted that I think about this more than is strictly required by the professional obligations of a classification clerk. I have noted, finally, that I have never felt unsafe. That is the truest thing in this report. For 14 hours, with a person the index cannot classify, in a station that spent the better part of a day trying to find a number for her and could not, I was not afraid. I was something else. A word I have been trying to locate for 9 years and have not quite found. Something between recognition and accounting. The sensation of a category that has been missing for a long time finally acquiring a shape, even if the shape does not fit any existing field. I left the threat index blank. I still think that was correct. The field stays blank, not because I have failed to find a number. Because every number I have found, thinking about it carefully, about what it would mean for a human being to grow up on Ardenvast and come out the other side of 26 years, with a resting cardiac output at the level the biometric survey documented, and the capacity to sit on a floor for 6 hours without apparent cost, and the relationship with difficult things that makes a person say, thank you to a clerk who did their job. Every number I have found, thinking about it, seems wrong in the direction of being too small. 14 months after the intake, I received a transit completion notification from the Harath Systems Arrival Registry. The notification was automated, generated by their own intake system when she cleared their arrival process. Their threat index field, according to the shared registry data appended to the notification, read 0. They had found a number. They had filled the field. I looked at that for a while. I left my own field blank.